Well, good morning. This is a History 1302 supplemental video for lecture, and it was cover the growth of America through immigration up through the Ellis Island experience. Well, as we now look and turn toward the growth of American cities, there are quintessential American cities in this time period that really reflect the changing America post-Civil War. One such city would be Chicago, another Cleveland, Pittsburgh, any of those good and old great industrial cities of the Northeast, and particularly what we call now the Rust Belt. Additionally, you'll have places like Detroit in the early 20th century come into its own and be itself a massive center of industrial might and so forth. But the city is quintessentially now American thing. And what you're seeing is that with regard to the filling of America, the growing of America, a lot of that has to do with the fact that you're seeing massive amounts of immigration take place into the United States from other parts of the globe. Immigration has always been an American phenomena and is not unique, of course, to America, but at the same time, we are, as we like to say, a nation of immigrants. My family splashed ashore with the German migrations of the pre-Civil War era, 1848, at least the Giesenschlag side did, though there's some English parts of my bloodlines that come back from the 1600s. Now, some of you who are watching this may have had family who immigrated to the United States in the last 40 to 50 years, or maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But in the same time, there's been great migrations here or there. And the reality is, with regard to migration or immigration, is you're going to see one of the greatest waves of immigration make up right at the end of the Civil War and basically run all the way through till about 1920. And that Great Migration is literally called the Great Migration or the Great Immigration. It takes place out of Central and Eastern Europe, Southern Europe too. It is not really found as in immigrants from England or France or anything of that nature, but really Italy and Russia, Poland and parts of Germany too, and Latvia and Estonia, Armenia, and what have you. You will have, of course, immigration in the same time period out west in the Chinese with their great contribution to the building of railroads and the populating of Western American cities. But for this, the main focus of this lecture is on cities that are frankly east of the Mississippi River, and on top of that, where they're coming from and where they're going. These cities and these immigrants here, they come for various reasons. Some of the earliest of the great immigrants who come are young men, and you can call them in your notes birds of passage. The birds of passage, they're going to come from Italy, particularly. They are young men looking to work, young men looking for a new life. Most of these people in general are coming for a full belly. The American immigration experience is not unique to one just phenomena of, say, religious migration. It is a immigration of people for various reasons. Political dissidents, probably in my case, draft dodgers. The fact of the matter is people come for various reasons, sometimes for the full belly or a better life economically. And with those young men, these birds of passage, what they're looking to do is they're looking to come to North America and to make money and then send it back overseas. One of the things we probably ought to dispatch of and deal with right now is the idea that crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the 19th century was frankly dangerous. It wasn't. And it has happened a whole lot. It happens on a very regular basis, and it's not terribly expensive. Now, you may not have the money to spend and put yourself in a first class cabin, but if you get into steerage, it may be uncomfortable at times, stinky at others, and a little bit leaky and damp. But the issue of crossing the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of even the winter, it may be very bumpy then, but simply crossing the Atlantic Ocean is not that big of a deal. It takes about 10 days to 2 weeks. You do it. You take off from somewhere in England or perhaps some other port of call in Europe, and then you land in New York or some other city. It is I guess you could say, as far as these birds of passage are concerned, they'll make this trip across the Atlantic Ocean several times in their life, in all likelihood. And they'll come across and they'll work in a field, say a cotton field in Texas. Maybe they'll work in some sort of longshoreman setup. They'll maybe do something else in other parts of the United States. They'll work, they'll make money, and they'll get back on at the end of the, say, the growing season. They'll get back on a boat and they'll go across the Atlantic Ocean again, go back to Italy or Sicily, and give money to their family. That's not uncommon. These men are usually young, your age, frankly, or a little older, but in that general vicinity, it's a young man's game. It's especially a game for men who are not married, and that would be worth noting right there. But they're the first of the real great migratory waves that come. Other immigrants who are going to come to North America and move to North America are Russian Jews. I think that's you ought to make note of that. Most of these folks who come, especially the early immigrants who come to America, they will come and they stay. Rather, they come and they go, and sometimes they'll eventually just start staying. But you never had the nostalgia, to my reading, and admittedly, it may not be as deep as a PhD on immigration history. But my reading has been is that those who have moved to America in the 19th century and the early 20th century, who are Russian Jews, did not move here and get all that nostalgic about moving back to the home country. I mean, allowing for that one time something happened, and boy, this would have never happened in Russia. But the reason being is that if you think that the Nazis and the Germans were the only ones who put the thumb down on Jews and tried to persecute and hurt them because of their Jewishness, the fact of the matter is that's not true at all. The Russians have a fairly good history of Russian pogroms. The phrase is pogrom, Pogrom. A pogrom is basically a organized, to one degree or another, organized assault upon a community, and in this case, particularly a Jewish community. So those Russian Jews were moved to America. They settled in the East Coast, particularly, though you'll find some in Chicago, that quintessential American city. But anyways, you'll find them, and when they move here, they set up shop and take hold and do quite well. And they move in as well. But you'll find quite a few settlers over the years who will move in a large numbers, millions in fact, come. In 1990, and you could update this probably without too much trouble out of the 2010 census, but in the 1990 census, the estimation then is that approximately 100 million Americans, or in 1990s numbers, that would be approximately 40% of the population, was descended out of that great migration wave to one degree or another. So they're probably a good number of you in this room who take your lineage out of the Italian ethnicity, or you take it out of a Polish ethnicity somewhere along your route, and you would find that you would have family members who came ashore at Ellis Island in that time period. And so they do come, and they come in massive numbers. And what this big migratory wave does is it helps create and helps bring about a new America that is rapidly urbanizing. And that's an important thing you need to make note of. And understand that. America, by the time you get to 1900, is rapidly leaving behind the idea of a rural America. In fact, actually, in the 40 years after the Civil War, it's really almost a night and day America, from the end of the Civil War to the beginning of or the 50 years afterward, the beginning of the First World War. You really see America change quite a bit. I'll give you a few statistics. You can find this in your textbook, and you can find it elsewhere. But here's a couple of statistics you can hear and write down. A city would be defined as 8,000 or more. We say like the city of Brenham or bigger. The United States growth quadrupled from 1850 to 1900, so there's a lot of growth there. In 1790, one American lived in a city of 8,000 or more compared to 30 who lived in the rural parts of the country. By 1840, one American lived in a city of 8,000 or more versus 12 who lived in the country. And so you can see the change is moving. In 1870, that 30 years window is changing more rapidly. One American per city, 4 to the country. 1 in 3 by the time you get to 1900. And then 1 in 2 by 1910. That is a radical change and a radical adjustment on who is going where. And of course, by 1920, officially, the United States is an urban nation. And by 1920, they no longer can you say the United States was an agricultural nation. And probably most of you, as I recall in this room watching, I say in the room, but whoever's watching this video, most of you in my sections are going to be from the Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, Austin metropolitan areas, or some other place like that. It's a rare day that somebody says, you know what, I'm from a town the size of Snook. It's a rare day for you to say that I am from a smallish town in East Texas or somewhere else. Most of our students represent that modern reality. And that modern reality comes here in the 1820s, the 1860s and 70s, and accelerating out toward the 1910s and into the present day, arguably. So you're going to see this mass migration, this mass movement, and so forth, and here they come. And so as they move to America, they're going to start to be shunted through into Ellis Island. Some of you have been to New York City. If you haven't, some of you will probably travel there in your lifetime. And Ellis Island is a wonderful place to go. It is the gateway in many respects for many of those immigrants. And you probably have family members, some of you, who went through there. When you went through those immigrant gates at Ellis Island and other ports of call, you didn't just automatically walk into the nation. You did have a bit of an screening process. You would find the individuals there who are taking your name and giving you some basic information and so forth. They would need to check, prod, poke, and so forth. And some might say humiliate you. And some of the immigrants said exactly that. I was humiliated by going through Ellis Island. And one guy wrote on the wall, damned at Ellis Island, damned is the day I left my homeland. So not everybody's excited about that wonderful development there. But anyways, not everybody thought that. We'll get to those in a second. But what they would be looking for was obvious marks of disease. Say tuberculosis would be an easy example. You would want to keep out the really communicable diseases. Perhaps a venereal disease. It was an obvious venereal disease would be another one, but generally disease would be a problem. Feeble-minded was their term for those who had perhaps you could say a low IQ or some sort of mental learning disabilities and such. The point is, though, is that there were general things that they were looking for and so forth. But they didn't actually ever kick you out for being Jewish. They didn't kick you out for being some sort of dissident Christian sect or even a non-believer all the way around. So fact of the matter is no religious test was ever there. Some people, as they pass through Ellis Island, are going to have the effect of their name being changed a little bit. Perhaps you might even call it being anglicized. It didn't obviously happen to Giesenschlag, but I bet maybe somebody watching this video will say, you know what, my family used to have their name spelled this way, and it was changed and made more Anglo or English, though it was still clearly an ethnic name. They just kind of softened it up as it came here. So all those things took place going through Ellis Island. Most people went through in one day. The vast majority, if they didn't make it through one in one day, they would be held over for a few days to let the cold or the illness pass, and then they'd make it on in. Very few people, like 96, 97% make it through. Only about 3% or so are turned back around and sent back out of the country. Frankly, we had a lot of land, and we had a lot of need for bodies and willing hands and strong backs, and so there was an open and welcoming, at least for some people, especially in the business community and the immigrant communities, to welcome them into the United States. So we have that with Ellis Island. But Ellis Island is the quintessential example of that great migration passing into America in our distant past now. And when they got off the boat and they passed through Ellis Island, you will have some individuals who are just literally babes in the woods with regard to immigration. They may be the first in their family moving to America. Whereas others, on the other hand, may have a son or a father or a brother who's already lived here, and he sent word through letter or telegraph or something back to the mother country, back to Poland or back to Russia or back to Italy, saying, do this, don't do that. Be careful for these individuals. Watch out for these unscrupulous sorts as they come to your territory. As you come through the doors there at Ellis, don't let them take your money. Because there were these individuals who would say, hey, we'll get you to Cincinnati, Ohio. We'll get you to fill in the blank town where your family is, and but it's going to cost you X amount of dollars. It's going to cost you perhaps half your possessions, and they may leave you high and dry, or they just simply are just pulling your eye teeth out. They may perform the service, but you can get it done much, much cheaper. It is worth noting as well that those settlers who are going to come to North America, going to settle in the United States, are generally going to go where they have communities. When you talk about communities, say for Poles, you'll find a lot of Polish men who will go to Chicago. They'll also go to Cincinnati. Cincinnati, by the way, is the home of pork. Lots and lots of pork and will be made. In fact, Chicago's bad about it too. They said that with regard to Chicago and the meatpacking industry at Chicago, with their pork more especially, also could be said about Cincinnati because it was called Porkopolis. They said that they used every part of the pig except the oink. So they used it all, just not the oink, because they couldn't grind that up too. What would you use all that pig for? Well, obviously to eat a lot of it, but you can also make glue, you can make shoes, you can make this, you can make that. Industry is a rather interesting thing. But the Great Migration takes place. It is a big, big deal, and the quintessential American city would be Chicago in this whole scenario here. Chicago is a small town at first at the part of the 19th century, and it is called the Windy City because of all the braggarts and so forth that are found there. The Windy City, not only that, but it is also going to be found, Chicago will be found, is an old Indian trading post or Indian town, a village, I guess you could say, that the word Chicago supposedly means something like fetid swamp, malarial swamp, deadly swamp, just a bad place to live. And so people, maybe that's true or not, but I don't think I'd name my kid Chicago just for that very reason right there. Let me see if I have anything else. Oh yeah, here's a great quote of some old immigrant into North America. Anyways, 25 million, here's some statistics for you. 25 million will immigrate from into the United States from 1866 to 1915. Ellis Island opens in 1892. But this is my favorite quote of all those individuals who passed through. In Ellis Island is one, I believe he's a Lithuanian immigrant, said it. He said, at Ellis Island, nobody changed my name. Nobody bothered me. Right away, I liked America. I made money and felt good. That's a good reason for somebody to move, and perhaps for your family, you have seen that as well in your life as well. But moving into the cities was hard, and it's not a pleasant place to be. And it's between the dumbbell tenements, the fires. Fire was always a problem for the cities. And so forth. This is something that's not in the next video that you'll watch. This video plus another will be in your package or email. But anyways, one thing to make note of is that Americans, whether they're recent immigrants or old-time Americans, their size and stature shrunk when they moved to the city. In fact, actually, Americans lived shorter lives in the late 19th century, and they were more unhealthy and shrank in size, literally got shorter because of the dirties and foulness that is an American city in the late 19th century. So it's a rather full-throated and a full-bodied affair. That's a good place to stop. I'm going to pause this video for the time being, and there's another one coming too. So thank you very much.